This is the CUNYCast, smart voices, good stories, and thought-provoking conversation from the City University of New York. I'm Rick Firstman.
And publishers, would get upset with me because they would say, well, look, we hired a black person. They probably knew his name, but he left. What can we do? That's what happened. They said, why do you think we don't have black people working here? And I said, well, obvious, man. It's because you're racist. I mean, and who isn't in America? So it's not a terrible insult. It's just true.
Walter Mosley was in his mid-30s and working as a computer programmer when he enrolled in the graduate writing program at the City College of New York in 1987. Just 3 years later, even before earning his degree, Mosley published his debut novel, Devil in a Blue Dress, a bestseller that would later be made into a movie starring Denzel Washington. More than 60 books later, Mosley is among the country's literary masters. And this month, the National Book Foundation is awarding him its Medal for Distinguished Contribution to American Letters. Mosley is the first African-American man to win the Lifetime Achievement Honor from the organization that presents the National Book Awards. Mosley's life as a writer was born at CUNY and nurtured by faculty mentors, including the renowned Irish novelist Edna O'Brien. And in 1998, those bonds led him to establish a publishing certificate program at CCNY to open doors for minorities in an industry long known for its lack of diversity. I talked with Mosley about his life, his work, race, politics, and City College. Here's our conversation. Walter Mosley, thank you so much for coming on the CUNYcast, and congratulations on this great honor from the National Book Foundation.
Well, thank you very much. I'm really happy about it.
You're in LA now. During the pandemic, you live in LA. You have a place in Brooklyn also, but you're out there for a while.
I live in New York, but I actually own a piece of Brooklyn, so it's that's mine. But I come out to LA a lot. I'm from here, and also we do work with television shows and stuff. It's easier to be here than not to.
Right. And it's LA is where you grew up, of course, and where most of your novels are set. So I must admit, I was unaware of your CUNY connection until I saw a reference to the City College publishing program in the announcement of the award. And but the connection is even more pivotal, going to the very inception of your career as a writer. But I'm going to leave that as a little foreshadow and start even earlier in your story. So you didn't begin writing until you were in your 30s, but you've said that as a kid your head was filled with a lot of fantasies. So it sounds like you were a storyteller from the beginning, and you were your own first audience.
Well, yeah, I was an only child. My mother was an only child. My father was an orphan. And so, we were very kind of alone and kind of used to being alone, all three of us. And, I'd just be in my room making up stories, adventures that I could be in, that's how it started. But I never thought of being a writer. I don't think I ever wrote anything down like that ever, actually, until I said, oh, maybe I could be a writer. Yeah.
So it was all in your head. Did you, over the next 20 years of your life, was it somewhere in the back of your mind, or it just sort of came out of nowhere?
No, my notion of kind of making up stories that I lived in my head has always been the case. So I was always thinking these things, but I never just thought about them as stories that I would write. I mean, I could tell people stories, but even that was not that much.
Was there a theme to your stories?
No, it's just kid stories. It could be a book I was reading, or a superhero I'd like to be, or a television show that I'd seen that I wanted to be a part of that. It's just making up things, fantasy.
Right.
It was fun.
Now, see, your family history is interesting. Your mother was Jewish from New York. Father was a black man from Louisiana. So tell me a little bit about them.
My mother went to Hunter. She started Hunter. I think there was a Hunter High School, right?
Right.
So she went to that. She graduated Hunter High School when she was 15, and went to Hunter College. And she graduated the college when she was 19. She was very much ahead of herself and everything. Very much, she was a Trotskyite, political activist, all that stuff.
Right.
My father was born in New Iberia, Louisiana. His mother died when he was 7. His father disappeared, probably died when he was 8, and so he was on his own from then. And his connection to writing is kind of interesting. One of the things that he did when he was a kid, he used to read pulp magazines, and he loved them, and he wanted to write stories. So he wrote actually a story, um, a western that he sent to some one of the pulp publishers in Chicago, uh, and they never answered. But about a year later, maybe he saw pretty much the same story
Huh.
published in a magazine, and he went, "Oh, right, I can't be a writer, right?" And I didn't remember that story that my father told me when I was a kid until maybe my third or fourth book,
Huh.
and I thought, "Wow, maybe I'm like acting, unconsciously acting out my father's wishes."
So he somehow they both made their way to California and met there. Is that it?
Yeah, my father had gone to World War II, and what he found kind of devastating about World War II is that when he left with about 100 other guys from his part of Houston, Texas, and um, most of those guys made it back. I mean, some people die no matter what, right? But hardly anybody was killed in battle or anything, and most of them made their way back. But when he got to Houston, back to Fifth Ward, Houston, Texas, almost everybody he knew was dead. That life was much harder sleeping in his own bed in Fifth Ward, Houston, Texas, than it was being in the largest war in the history of the world. So he decided to move to California. He said maybe it'd be better than California. My mother had come out. I don't know what a lot of my relatives had moved to the West Coast from New York, and especially the older ones, staying out of the heat, the cold. Um, and my mother came out to live with our cousin Lily. She met some guy, very very rich guy, who lived on one of those private streets toward downtown in L.A. And uh, but she was still politically active, so she got a job at a school, as a file clerk. And my father got a job at the same school as a janitor, and they met
Hmm.
there. And not long after that, my mother went back to her husband and said, I don't love you. I'm breaking up with you," and that was it. I mean, they were together from then.
Wow. So what was it like to be an interracial couple, and also for you to be the son of an interracial couple back in the 50s and 60s?
You know, it's a really good question because no matter how many people you ask that question, you're going to get different answers. I think my parents were absolutely committed to the thought that uh, I wouldn't have to face those problems. So we lived in the hood. I lived in Watts, and all that stuff. And so whatever Watts had to offer, I was a part of. But I never heard them talk about that kind of stuff, and they sheltered me from having to be aware and dealing with that kind of stuff until I was a teenager.
Hmm.
So when I was a kid, I remember, talking to my father about, mom is white. Of course, she's not white; she's Jewish, but and you're black, and and my father just looked at me and said, "Walter, I'm black, you're black. That's it." And so that was just me. I'm black. So I came from different places. Like anybody with two different parents comes from different places. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, when I got older, I was aware of racial issues, and when I went to elementary school, I went to this tiny little school in LA called Victory Baptist Day School, and at Victory, we studied Afro-American history. So I knew all this stuff, about the history of black people, the history of white people. It just there wasn't in my mind there wasn't a conflict between those things. And I think that when people usually talk about this stuff, they're talking about the conflict. And there was no conflict. My mother, my father, my life, and still today, like I know a lot of people who have internally they have a lot of conflict over their biracial background. But I just don't have it. They never talked about it.
Right.
They didn't allow that kind of stuff to enter into life.
Right. So you took a really circuitous route to the writing life. You said you went through your hippie phase, and you went to college in Vermont, got a political science degree. What were your ambitions in those years in your early
Well,
20s?
the great thing about being a hippie, I don't know if you remember, probably you
Yeah.
do. There's a great, I mean, it, it was very much what's happening today. What's today like?
Hmm.
Yeah, there's tomorrow and there's plans and stuff, but I wasn't that worried about it. I needed to make money. I needed to pay my rent, so I had jobs. I was a computer programmer and a cook for a while and a potter for a while. And I just did that stuff. I didn't mind doing it. I thought it was fun. I didn't think that that was going to be the definition of my life. Uh, and so one day I'm just sitting there and I'm thinking, and I write a sentence, and I go, "Wow, that's a good sentence. Maybe I'll try to be a writer." And even then, my decision was not so much that I was going to get published and get so-called famous and this and that. I thought it would be really great if I could write a short story, beginning, middle, and end. That would make me so happy. And that's what I went after. That's what I tried to do. I finally got it done, and one thing led to another, and I became a writer. But it wasn't really I wasn't expecting that.
So you were working as a computer programmer,
Yep.
and were you working for Mobile Oil?
Mobile
And,
oil, home insurance. There were Dean Witter. I worked for a lot of people.
so you were kind of a freelancer, or did you work?
I was a freelancer
Yeah,
at the end. I
yeah,
just went. We get a job. You made twice as much money, so and it's great because they didn't have to pay for all that. Retirement
yeah.
and medical and vacations, all that stuff. You paid for everything, so you worked your hours and got your money.
And you came to New York when you were what, about 30?
Yeah, somewhere around there. Yeah,
And,
30, 32, something like that.
and what brought you to the city?
I was living in Boston, and you know, there's a there's a what was that, is that the Irish section at that time? Was that Charlestown? I think it was Charlestown.
Hmm.
Anyway, um, it was a Friday afternoon. A young black man had gotten his check. He had a check cashing thing with I think 7-Eleven, and so he walked a block into Charlestown to 7-Eleven, and he walked past the bar, and the people saw him. And when he walked back, the people ran out of the bar and beat him to death. That was my experience of Boston. Boston was an incredibly racist city
Hmm.
then. People tell me it's not anymore, and I go and it doesn't look like it, so maybe it isn't. But it was so hard. I went, "God, I got to get out of here." I know New York was very violent at that time, but at least they just kill me just because they want to kill me, not because I'm black. And so yeah, I'm gonna move to New York, and I did. It was it was a good thing.
Yeah. And so you're at this point, so you're writing kind of, you're working as a computer programmer and just kind of writing on the side, just
Hmm.
sort of for fun,
Well, I'm
or
still writing for fun. The greatest idea is to do something for fun, and you get paid for it, right?
and then you made this decision to apply to the writing program at City College, and you were in your mid 30s at that point.
Got in the graduate writing program at City, and that was really a great moment. It was a really great moment for me.
So you got into the master's, was it an MFA program
Yeah.
in creative writing,
Mhm.
and so you were clearly, you know, a level up and making this serious at that point.
Well, when you take a writing program anywhere, the chances are the job you're going to get is teaching, right? So I did think that. I said, well, if I study writing and I get some stories published and finally somebody, maybe win some little award or something, then maybe I could teach college in the Midwest, teach other people how to write. That's what I thought it was a possibility. I wasn't thinking about it that hard, but to be in the school I spent every day around people who were writers. In America, it's very hard to, for anybody to pay any attention to you. If you say you're a writer, they walk away. And So these I was with a group of people who wrote fiction and poetry, some nonfiction, and it was great.
Hmm. And you found a mentor, and it happened to be Edna O'Brien, who's the legendary Irish novelist and playwright.
But she was one of my teachers and a very important person in my career. But my mentor at City College, I had really two of them. The major one is Frederick Tutton, who taught there, and then Bill Matthews, the poetry teacher who's since died. Those are and it was a very supportive program and situation. And unlike most of these crazy places, it didn't cost you, your future 15 years to pay off or something.
Right. So what was your first try at publishing a book?
I wrote a book that Edna asked me to write. I wrote a couple of chapters, and she thought it was great. She says, "Walter, write a novel," and I went, "Okay, I'll write my novel." And it was a book called Gone Fishing. And it's by major characters, from the mystery series, Easy Rawlins and Mouse. But it wasn't a mystery; it was just them in Texas and in this mythical town called Pariah. And they were, they had an adventure. It's kind of a coming of age story for these two guys. And I sent that story out to a lot of people, and they all said, very good writing. We really like it a lot, but it's not commercial. What they meant when they said it's not commercial is that it was the belief in publishing at the time that white people didn't read about black people, black women didn't like black men, and black men didn't read. So who would buy your book? Because it's black people in Texas. And they didn't want to publish it. That was fine with me. I just started writing another book about Easy and Mouse because I was enjoying writing about them, and that's what I thought. Well, you should do what you enjoy. And that was Devil in a Blue Dress. And that was bought.
Clearly.
And they bought that.
So back, Edna O'Brien, she was encouraging you. She was really fascinated by your identity, right?
Yeah, she was. And I mean, that's not what interested me about Edna. And really, I already knew my identity. I didn't need her to tell me.
Sure.
But she was such an extraordinary writer, and she and in my opinion paid more attention to students than I mean, it was even reasonable. So I was just so happy to be around her. And when she said, "Well, go write a novel," she had such impact on me that I 6 weeks later I had written that novel. By the way, I published Gone Fishing 4 or 5 years later with Black Classic Press. My good friend Paul Coates, who has a publishing company, and it did very well. It's a good book actually. It's just that you had to convince people that black men would read it.
And you had to just kind of ignore what people were telling you.
Yeah.
About why they wouldn't publish it.
Yeah, well, you just ignore people. Well, no, you accept the fact that they're not publishing it.
Right.
Now, let me explain to you why. And I go, I really don't care why. You're not publishing it, so let me move on to the next person. That's all. I still feel like that.
Huh. So, Easy Rawlins, tell me about the character and where he came from and what's sustained him, through 15 or so mysteries.
In today's world, if you want to be a part of that world, you have to have a place in history. And there's the best way to have a place in history is through culture and popular culture. So books, television shows, political characters, people who talk, who you see and you say, oh wow, this is important what they've done, what they're thinking. And one of the best ways to do it is through literature, because literature informs all those other things. And so I wanted to write stories about the Black migration from the Western South into Los Angeles and somewhat San Francisco, and how those people lived. So I wanted to talk about their lives. So I have this perfect, like the structure, which is the mystery, which everybody reads mysteries. Because the more different the characters are, the better, because then they get to see other parts of the world. So I'm going to write a mystery about a guy who's come from the South. He's living in Los Angeles, a lot like my father, but he wasn't my father, and who becomes a detective. and who starts to who moves through that black life, that black world, as a detective, solving problems, and running into difficulties that people run into if they're black walking around the streets of Los Angeles.
Hmm. And there's also Socrates Fortlow,
Yeah.
another character, recurring character, and who has a sort of a comes from a different place. What were you trying to write
What's
about through him?
What's really funny, I just think I wrote the book Black Betting, and I was talking to my publisher. And my publisher said, "Well, Walter, you're writing these books about these black people from the South who moved to the West, and they're kind of literary, and so well, and what we're going to do is we're going to send you on a book tour of Jewish book fairs in the South." And I said, "Wow, that's like a really fun idea, because they go to those book fairs, they've already read all the books and they bought them, and it's." But I always in the 4 or 5 places I went, there's always on the right side is these three little old ladies who are sitting there saying, "Well, we see where your father is in these books, but where's your mother?" Now they asked me the question, but they never meant it because they knew where it was. There, I think that Easy, who's very literate and very well read, was reading a book about Hadrian, the Roman emperor, and they said, "Hadrian, that's where your mother is." And I'm saying, "Well, Hadrian's not Jewish, and black people read, and and so, but I understand, but they know who my mother is, so I couldn't convince them." And so what I did was I said I need to write about a black philosopher, right? And I thought of a lot of different ways I could come about that, but it ended up a man who really has made some terrible mistakes in his life, who is a convicted murderer who did murder uh, without feeling, and now he's trying to become better. So his experience, he spent 27 years in prison. And when he comes out of prison, he's trying to make a better life for himself and the people that he's around, living deep, deep, deep in the hood. And that was really why I wanted to write about a philosopher that these ladies weren't going to claim. They said, "Well, I see your father in that too," but I mean, that's not true. But and I love Socrates. I actually want to write about him again. I have to think about that. Thinking about it lately.
um, so uh, in these years, and then through the '90s, when you're now successful, your Devil in Blue Dress was made into a big movie with Denzel Washington. Uh, and you're having experiences, with the publishing industry, and it sort of leads you to want to start this program at City College, this publishing
Hmm.
industry certificate program in '98. So, what was the genesis, and what did you do to get that going?
I was, I was part of the literary world, and I was involved a lot with publishers at one point. And publishers, would get upset with me because they would say, "Well, look, we hired a black person. They probably knew his name, but he left. What can we do?" That's what happened. They said, "Why do you think we don't have black people working here?" And I said, "Well, obvious, man. It's because you're racist. I mean, like, and who isn't in America?
Right.
So it's not a terrible insult. It's just true." And I realized that me saying that to publishers was not going to help. But there was deep problem. Any business in America that doesn't get money from the government doesn't feel it necessary to to integrate, to hire people of different races or genders or whatever. They don't have to do it if they don't get money from the government, because the only power the government has is that we're not going to give you any more money. And publishing is one of those things. So it's mostly white people, a lot of people who are from the Ivy League schools, not only. And so I understood the problem. I had a friend, a woman who was an editor, who almost quit because she'd gotten a job, and she went to her boss, who was an editor, and she said, "I want to publish this book." And she said, "What's it about?" It was a nonfiction book about black women's hair. And the editor, the chief editor said, "Well, no, you can't do that. Women aren't interested in their hair." And she said, "Well, black women are." And the woman is like, well, that sounds kind of racist to me. And so it took a really a long time, a few years to publish the book. It was a big success.
Yeah.
But that was the problem. No, you didn't know anybody. So I started the Institute at City College. You have um, the people teaching it are people working in the industry, donated their time to working in the industry. And then there's all these other students that you get to know. So as they slowly start to get jobs in the industry, if they run into a problem like the woman who said that, they can call their friends, they can call their teachers, and they can discuss it. And so I thought this is a way to really, begin. It's only a beginning to integrate the New York's publishing industry, but not just to publish books. Publishing books, okay, fine. Publishing books, writing books, great. But in marketing, in publicity, in editing, in all the various aspects of the business of publishing.
Right. Um, yeah, I was talking with David Unger, who runs the
Mm-hmm.
program and who you know well, and he was telling me that there have been a couple hundred graduates of the certificate
Yeah,
program, and working in publishing. So it seems like it's had a real impact.
yeah, no, it's working.
Yeah.
It's working, and it's great.
So I wanted to talk about politics a little bit. It's hard to avoid, but not that we want to. Um, I was interested. You said that writing fiction has to be a little political, which I thought was a very interesting
Hmm.
idea. Talk about that for a second.
Well, I mean, you have to talk about the world that people are living in, in order uh, for any place to make sense. Well, either that or to completely make up a new world, a fantasy world, a science fiction world, uh, a secret society that no one else knows anything about. But in most books, you're writing about the world you live in. So, like, if I'm going to write a book and I'm going to be talking about some character, it could be a guy, like a guy who's a bare knuckled boxer, whatever. But I can't forget, that black people could be kept out of things everywhere. I can't forget that women didn't have the right to vote, didn't really have control over their own property, their own bodies, their own children. You have to remember what the world is that you're dealing with, and your interpretation of that world is a political act.
Hmm.
So whatever what you're saying, you might be saying a women didn't have the right to vote and they were happier then. You might say something like that. Well, okay, that's a political act. You saying that, or you could say it was too bad and we needed to work harder, or you might say I just didn't get it. But whatever you're going to do, you're going to talk about the world that we live in, and in doing that, you're making a political act. When Raymond Chandler, is writing about L.A., and him and a thousand other people about writing detective novels about L.A. And there's maybe only one or two black people ever in the books. That's a political thought. You're excluding people.
Right.
When Nathaniel Hawthorne is writing about New England and in the Scarlet Letter, and he neglects to talk about slavery. That's a political act because slavery was run out of New England at that time. You know, all of it is something that you have to know, that you have to think about. Uh, and I don't care what you think. You might not. We might be at polar opposites politically, but you have to make a statement about the world and about the people who live in that world. And in that, and on the simplest level, it's political.
Right. Which of your books do you think is the most relevant politically, or at its moment?
God, that's so hard to answer. I've written a few, I think four political monographs, so they're all politics,
Right.
beginning to end. Just my thoughts about politics. But and the novels, it's so hard to say. I don't I actually can't say. You know, I have I figured the ones I have the people that complain about the most. People complain a lot about easy wrongs because they say, well, you're always talking about that race stuff. Like he was driving this a fancy car down the street and the police stopped him four times. That would never happen. I said, it happens every day. He's telling me about. I did a thing recently where I did a lecture on writing, and part of it I was talking about your identity. Could be black or Irish or whatever it is. You have this racial identity, you have this cultural, this historical identity, and where does that come about in your writing? And certain people were saying that's too much. It's just I don't I don't like it. You know, I already know this stuff. I don't need to be taught that about my writing. I just need to know how to write the right sentences. And I'm thinking, no, that's not what you need to know.
Yeah.
You need to know who you are writing this novel.
Right.
But
Interesting. So, of course, this year we're all gripped by real life politics, racial justice, and the fate of our democracy itself. So we're recording this a week before Election Day. We don't know what's going to happen and how long it's going to last, but where's your head on everything in terms of the election?
well, I'm optimistic about one aspect. I think that Trump and those people who are afraid of him have put themselves in a really bad position politically, and I don't think that I don't think that he nor many people around him are going to survive the onslaught of the upcoming election. I Not taking. Let's say I'm right about that. I mean, it could be wrong, but I think that the left, which is really the center, is going to kind of take over a lot of the places, in the government, the Congress, the White House. But I feel that that Trump has done such a good job of polarizing, and underscoring that which was already polarized, and we have kind of mindlessly fallen into that kind of dialogue, where we're using language to try to hurt people, to try to frighten people, in the same way that the president has been doing. And I think that's wrong, and I think that we have to relearn how to be objective, and how to be what they call politic,
Right.
about what we're doing. And I think that comes up with things like defunding the police. I agree that we need to reimagine law enforcement in America. The idea of saying, well, I'm just going to take money away from these people and that's going to, make it better, is ridiculous. And people are using that language because they're angry. And I think that the anger has to be drained out of the language and say, yeah, we're going to reimagine law enforcement so everybody's going to be safer and that everybody's going to get a fair shake.
Right. Yeah, there's clearly just intense emotion all over the place that going to have to be drained. About, I guess, 15 years ago, you wrote about a new kind of black power that would operate outside the political parties, in pressing for change. So where are you now, particularly in light of this moment of racial reckoning we've been in this year?
It's interesting. I think the people's response to it have been basically according to how old they are, what they've experienced before. I was talking to someone who was really upset. She actually thought that the world was going to fall apart soon, that America was going to just shake apart because of the marches, Black Lives Matter, all this other stuff. Black woman, but she's just saying, I mean, how can we go through this and not destroy who we are? And I'm saying, but this is so mild compared to the Watts riots of 1965 that I was in. This is so mild compared to the second riots, even. And it's amazingly optimistic because it's not just Black people going out there getting shot down by the police. There's like all kinds of races and genders. They're out there,
Right.
and they're saying, "Come on, let's make this a better world." And so she's upset, to tears, and I'm thinking, wow, this is like a better world, And so it depends on
That's a very good point. Yeah.
what you're thinking.
Yeah.
I think 43 people were killed in the Watts riots in '65.
Hmm.
You know, and like 40 of them were black people. Um, and that's, I mean,
And you
that's
were right
really,
there.
yeah. No, I
Yeah.
was there. I
Yeah.
was there. I was there. There. Yes.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So, was you have a book of stories coming out soon?
The Awkward Black Man came out on September 15th.
Okay, just out.
It's a group of 17 short stories about unlikely black protagonists. You know, people who have really deep internal emotional problems, or people who are can't quite get the right thing. People who are very political, or very much into science, but who they're awkward. They're odd. They don't fit exactly right. They might do one thing well, but they do three things not so well. And this talking about these characters for me is so interesting, because it's about a world. It's about a people in a world that we don't usually talk about. Black characters in film, and also in books, have kind of definite little characteristics that they're gonna, either gonna be Sojourner Truth, or they're gonna be a pimp called Slickback. Are they gonna, what is it? What are they gonna be? And I didn't want those characters in this particular book, and it's fun.
Right. And you're also working on TV, a TV show.
Yeah, I'm working on the show Snowfall. I'm trying to do, it's been out for about 5 years, John Singleton's show. Uh, I, I'm trying to do. I think I've sold the Easy Rollins series to a big producer. We'll see what they're going to do. I'm trying with Sam Jackson to make a film, like a mini series based on my novel, The Last Days of Ptolemy Gray. Um, and a few other things.
So you're busy as ever.
Yeah.
You've got a lifetime achievement award, and but your lifetime is very much continuing in this
Yep.
writing
It's
world.
it's good.
Yeah.
It is indeed. Things are
Yeah.
going well. I'm not complaining.
That's great. Well, and I'm glad to hear that CUNY had a part in your success.
Yeah, it was great. It was a big part. I have. I'm so angry at the big private and semi-private universities that charge you $40,000-$50,000 a year to study creative writing. You know, and it's ridiculous. It doesn't cost anything. Even they don't need microscopes or spaceships or anything. But all this money, and they do it to make a profit, not to make writers. And when you go to City, or Brooklyn College, they're so it's so wonderful. Well, you pay whatever you pay to go to college. I mean, it costs something, but you're not going to go broke for the rest of your life doing it. And it was really wonderful to do that and to be there.
Yeah. Well, it's a great note to end on. Thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it, and
Thank you.
congratulations again.
All right, thanks a lot. See you in the next book.